Lovely. So welcome to the Hive Online on the 4th of September 2024. How did that happen? I am really pleased to have Stewart Davison here today to speak to us about the board's eye view of EDI data. Stewart is a board member at 2 housing associations, so he's very kindly agreed to come along and be grilled. I mean, answer a few easy questions about what boards are looking for and kind of what your feeling is as a board member about EDI data. So Stuart, can I ask you to introduce yourself? Oh, I'll let people in. Oh, there we go. Lovely, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks a lot, Claire. Thanks for inviting me along to today. So yeah, I'm Stewart Davison. I've been working in social housing for about 27 years now. I actually started as a frontline customer services officer in a small housing association in Bristol. But really, my professional career has been more on the technology side of things. So I've worked at various technology suppliers, always in social housing for about the last 20 odd years. And in the past year, I joined the board of Elim Housing, which is in Thornbury, just north of Bristol, and also TAF Housing, which is based in Cardiff. But I've actually been a non-exec at various organisations for about 15 years. So I'm a long-term board member, fairly new to the board at my respective organisations, but I'm pretty plugged into tech and stuff like that. So yeah, that's me.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I think what we all want to know is what is on the agenda in terms of EDI at the board level. So EDI being equality, diversity, and inclusion.
Inclusion, yeah. I mean, there's obviously the most pertinent one is how it relates to regulatory requirements. You mentioned before you started the meeting about the regulator. The regulator wants us as housing providers to know a lot more about our residents and tenants. So there's, of course, at a board perspective, because we're all about governance, there's always that perspective, and that's probably the strongest element when it comes to what board members are thinking about and looking at from an EDI perspective. And of course, it's not just that regulatory perspective, but it's also, well, how does setting organizational EDI goals and strategies, how does that play in to everything? And regularly we get information back at board meetings around getting data and benchmarking and KPIs related to EDI. But I think what's really interesting, particularly with the 2 roles that I've currently got, is we service very diverse communities. The last board meeting I was at TAF, I think it was stated that we've got something like somewhere between 38 and 45 different languages spoken amongst our tenant base. So from a data perspective and a governance perspective, as a board member, you're trying to think, wow, how do we deal with that? How are we engaging with residents and tenants? How are we actually able to deliver our services effectively when we've got elements like that? And I suppose the last one, particularly around EDI, is place shaping in communities. It's a really strong element within the boards that I'm at, that we're ensuring that when we're looking at either procuring new properties or developing new properties, that we make it cohesive and coherent within the community around that area. So of course, EDI data coming into the organisation in that respect is then crucial, because whilst it won't give us probably a totally accurate picture of that community surrounding whatever development we're going to do, it'll at least give us some idea. So that's kind of what the discussions are at the moment around EDI. I wouldn't say it's top of the agenda, but it is definitely a regular topic of discussion.
So it is on the agenda and it is being discussed, and absolutely. And when we use that term, I think that's part of the frustrations I'm seeing from some housing associations and other people, is that term EDI data. what do you mean by that? What, you know, and I don't mean you as an individual, but different people, I think, mean different things by it. Do you find that kind of confusion, or are you pretty clear on what it is as a board?
I think the organisations I work with themselves have done quite a bit of work on trying to define what they think EDI is. So in terms of my position as a board member, you know, I've got some clear direction from statements within policies and procedures about how we perceive EDI. And I'm fairly comfortable that within that scope, we're getting the right sort of information. But as you say, it's down very much to individual organisations about how they view EDI, and more importantly, what they're looking to capture in terms of EDI data and what they want to use it for. There isn't any one size fits all, and I think that's probably the right thing in this instance, because you know we all serve different communities. You know, one of my is based, like I say, north of Bristol, and the other one is in Cardiff. So two very different operating environments. So I think that's why it's one of those things that you can give yourself quite broad definitions of, but it's always going to come down to the individuality of the organisation, I think.
Absolutely, and I think that's the point, isn't it? There isn't one size fits all, but we are all trying to work to the same regulations and legislation, and the regulations use the word appropriate and relevant, and I think they're doing a lot of heavy lifting, aren't they, those words?
But that's the classic thing, isn't it? It's like reasonableness. You know, there are specific terms that are there from a legal perspective. So it's like everything, isn't it? You have to interpret their definitions, or you have to interpret the parameters that you can operate within until someone tests it, until something goes wrong or something like that, and then it's tested usually in the courts.
Absolutely, that's a very good point, and brings me on very nicely to my next question, which is it on the risk register? Is data collection on the risk register, or EDI itself? Is that on the risk register in general?
Data as a broad concept is definitely on the risk register. I wouldn't say that EDI data itself is on the risk register. EDI forms part of, like I've mentioned, you know, development. It's an element of other risks within the organisation. I don't think it sits. I'm trying to actually just you know, I've got a board meeting tomorrow, so I'll probably realise that we do. I think EDI is just one of those elements that forms, you know, across every part of risk. You know, we're having to think, you know, if we're looking at our customer services, you know, there's going to be an EDI element in there. If we're thinking about future service development, there's going to be an EDI element in there. If we're thinking about our own internal workforce and recruitment, there's going to be EDI. So I think it's just one of those elements that sits under other risks within the organisation. But as I said at the beginning, data in itself is its own risk, and it has its own tracking and metrics.
And that, I assume, the risk of losing it and the risk of hacking and all those kind of the cyber threats, like
I mean,
kind of things.
The data itself, you know, I think under the risk element of data, I think it sits as part of you know, collection of data as a risk. You know, are we collecting the right data, and are we collecting it in the right ways, and are we actually, should we be collecting it? You know, so there's those questions.
Brilliant. Love to hear that.
Storage. Yeah, there is the storage, you know, have we got it secure, safe? And then that does feed into a different risk element, which is cybersecurity and data compliance and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Has anyone else got any questions or comments on what you're seeing in your organisations, and how you're how you're presenting EDI to your organisations, or if it's not on the agenda? One of the the things that I was wondering about was, is there something that we as data protection professionals can do to support the board in terms of getting a handle on EDI and EDI data, and data collection in general? Because I do feel, just from conversations that I have, I feel that there is this, there are conversations that are going round and round in circles. And at some point we need to cut through and decide, what are we going to do? What, what's the purpose here, and what's the outcome that we're going for, and what are we going to collect and what we're not going to collect, and how we're going to use the data. So EDI specifically, but obviously all data. Love to hear you say that, Stuart. Is there something that we could be doing? Is there something we could be doing more? Oh, Tony, I've got 2 Tonys. I'll let Stuart answer, and then I'll come to Tony.
So that completely threw me then with you. Oh, Tony. So
yeah, sorry. So is there something that we as data protection professionals could be doing more or better to make things clearer, or
I think
make
from
things
my
more
perspective,
positive?
well, no, I think from a board perspective, it's always make it simpler.
Okay.
One of the issues we have as a board member is that we're having to keep a weather eye on, literally every element of the organization. We're not expected to be experts in every area. That's why we have an SLT, that's why we have a workforce, etc., etc. So whenever people are coming to the board to actually talk to us, update us, provide us with information, for me, it's always, you've got to keep it simple. And what you've got to do is connect it and align it with the overarching strategy. If you come to talk to me about data security or data compliance or data collection, make sure it's always referencing back to the strategic purpose, because really that's what the board's there for. We're there more around the strategy. You have the executive to actually deliver the operational side of things. So I have, luckily not with the 2 organizations I'm in, but with other boards I've been on, probably not so recently, but in the past, people would come and just swamp you with operational data and operational information. As a board member, I just physically do not have the headspace to take that all in. Give me the outputs, the outcomes, and make sure you're showing me how it's fitting into the strategy and the overall direction of the organization. And if you can do that concisely and succinctly, then it's golden for me. You can always reference papers, you can always attach appendices if there's more detail, and then it's really up to the individual board member to go, I'm happy with what I'm seeing here, and then what's been presented. Other board members want to go through things with a fine-tooth comb, and that's where appendices and attachments are really good. So all I'd say is, don't swamp us with information.
And are you thinking particularly about us who are a little bit nerdy about the law? Sometimes we might give you a bit too much detail on the law.
I wouldn't say a board, personally, if someone's going to show me something that relates to regulatory or legal compliance, then I'm not going to say no, but the rule applies. Try and keep it simple. If you sat there having to tell me something for 15 to 20 minutes about an obscure piece of data law, my brain's got, you probably lost me at about sort of minute 30.
Yeah.
So that's all I'd say. And of course, again, it's very individual. So I'd hope in the organizations that you're a part of that you do get access to board members, because then you'd get to know, you'll get to know, oh, Pete loves that. Oh, Sally just wants the headline. You'll get to know the personalities on the board, and you'll get to know how the board operates. So you'll become quite sensitive to, well, what do my board papers need to look like, or what information do I need to supply, or what don't I need to worry about?
That's a really good point about having access to the board members, because data protection officers should have access to that highest level of management. Anyone, I'll come to Tony in a minute, but I would be interested if anyone would be brave enough to let me know, and I don't need to use your name if you don't want to. Is that something that you struggle with, or is that something that you've got sorted at your organisation? I'll let people type that in the chat as well if you don't want to actually say that out loud. But Tony, let's come to you. Sorry, you've been waiting, but we've got two Tonys, and one of you has your hand up. You're on mute, Tony. You're on mute.
Mute.
There you go.
So
I can hear you. Yeah.
I was thinking of EDI in terms of what the government is doing, because they want inland revenue communications on a weekly and monthly basis. And what security is there over that?
What do you mean by inland revenue communications? Sorry.
The tax that you pay and NI all has to be communicated to the revenue.
That wouldn't come under EDI though. For these purposes, we're talking about equality, diversity and inclusion data. So it's about people's characteristics. Oh,
okay.
So it's and this is part of the problem, what does EDI mean? But under the GDPR, there are 4 types of data that are kind of counted as EDI data for the purposes of Article 9. I'm going too technical there, but other people here will know what I mean, which are race and ethnicity, religion, sexuality and health/disability. So none of those things I wouldn't think would be linked to HMRC returns. I wouldn't have thought. Hopefully.
There might be in statistical information.
There might be, yeah.
But the person shouldn't be identified as to who it relates to. Yeah.
And actually talking about the statistics, a question came up yesterday, the day before, about the core returns. I can't remember what it stands for. Continuous recording. Anyone help me out? Is it continuous record? The core
that came from me, didn't it, Claire? You and I were talking about it, and I've forgotten what core is. But this is where the housing department must report any new tenants to
new lettings,
the housing and communities government department. So there is a legal basis, there's a lawful basis for doing so. But I'm presently mapping the EDI data across a housing organisation that really hasn't done any of that mapping at all. Really, when you ask people, they say, well, what do you mean? Why do you want to map it? Well, when we start challenging and saying, well, where does the data go next? Who uses it? What systems are used on? Everything is very fluffy. Everything is very generalized. And we certainly find that data then is actually going to be potentially used by another department for another purpose. And the question then comes is, well, can they rely on the same legal basis, or is there a different legal basis? And have the data subjects been made aware of the multiple uses of that data? And the answer I tend to find is no, that's been forgotten about.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just the place that we're working at the moment. It does happen at a lot of places. That, thank you, Joe. We've got the continuous recording of social housing lettings and sales system, brackets core, CORE, from the continuous recording bit. And that is one of the things where we see EDI definitely in a more operational. I know we're going away from board at the moment, but I'm just going to throw this out here because it's relevant to every housing association, that you have to collect that core data, which includes some EDI data, and you have to report it to the government. But the point that Chris is making is that because we've got it for that reason, for that purpose, doesn't mean we can just pick it up and use it for another purpose. And that's where some of the vagueness and the grey lines are coming in a little bit as well. Has anyone else got any questions for Stewart, or any comments? I'll keep you anonymous if you want.
Well, my
Chris.
question to Stewart around this was that, you know, would you as a board member assume that the data that you're getting around, you know, the demographics of the city, as you talked about, you know, and I know that's absolutely true, would have a lawful basis because it's being collected by the Housing and Communities Department of the government? Would you make that assumption, or do you think others on the board who maybe are not as technically aware as you, that means that data is freely available to use for other reasons within the organisation?
I think from our perspective, and this applies to both the organisations I work with, we try to be very clear about what we're going to be using the data for, and that it's always tied back to the purpose of the organisation. So I use that point about understanding in TAF that, you know, we've got 40 plus different languages that are spoken. So, you know, if we're capturing EDI data and ethnicity and nationality is an element within that, then for me, it's really pertinent that we have to understand that, because, good example, a couple of years ago, TAF was one of the leading organisations taking Ukrainian refugees into TAF properties. We needed to source Ukrainian speakers within the staff team. So to me, you know, prior to something like that, I probably would have been like, well, why are we kept, you know, do we need to really know, you know, some of this stuff? But actually, as long as we're really clear about why we're capturing certain data elements and what actually we're using it for, I think as a board, I'm pretty comfortable, and I'm casting my mind, because actually with this board meeting I've got tomorrow, we're just refreshing our strategy, and there is a line about how we will be clear with tenants and residents about why we're capturing data and what we're going to use it for within the organisation.
That's good to hear, definitely. I did work with a housing association who were coming to me and saying, we've got to collect EDI data from our tenants. You know, how do we go about it? And I said, well, you're doing it the wrong way around. The starting point is purpose, exactly like you've just said, Stuart. Why are you collecting it? And I was distraught to hear that answer was because the board says that we've got to reach a target of 60% of EDI data fields having been filled in. And there was no link to strategy, like you were saying. And when the furthest I could get by digging, because as you know me, I was obviously digging as much as I could. And like, why is that a target? The furthest I could get was because other housing associations are doing it too.
I think,
and you can imagine my reaction to that.
This is one of my bugbears, but it also goes back to the point, you know, when you ask the question about what can you as, you know, data professionals,
yeah,
this is why I made the point about how it links to strategy. Too many times through lack of experience or lack of the right knowledge around things like tech and data, it's very easy to fall back on the KPIs, the need to capture information and data to report on, to ensure that we're meeting statutory and regulatory requirements. So it becomes a comfort blanket in some respects. So when you know, if you don't know how the data you're capturing is going to be used to further your strategy, it's easy for it to go, well, actually, it's an operational thing, and we get reported to it as board, and it allows us to go, okay, yeah, things are going all right. You know, because I go back to the, you know, you asked the question right at the beginning, you know, governance is one of our key things. So we have to be confident that things are happening in the right way. For me, the importance of collecting data like EDIs, how does it inform the services we deliver, and how does it meet and support the strategy going forward?
Brilliant. Thank you. We've got a couple more hands up. Are you okay to come on and speak, Olivia? You're on mute at the moment.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello, I've got you now. Yeah, I can hear you.
Does that mean you want me to turn my camera on?
You don't have to. Absolutely don't
I've
have
tried
to.
to turn it on, but it hasn't gone on for some reason. I don't know why. In terms of EDI data going to, we talked about the obligation in terms of core. And obviously the lawful ground there is, we have a legal obligation.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
What I'm always sort of a bit unclear about with EDI data is the Article 9 processing condition. It has to be substantial public interest. It has to be equality
of opportunity and treatment. Oh, I've lost you. Oh,
hear me?
is it just me, or is every? Oh, are you back?
Can you hear me?
I've got you now. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
So you're saying yeah. So equality of treatment and opportunity.
Yeah. There is no other processing condition, is there? I don't think that we can use.
It will depend what. Coming back to purpose, exactly what is it that you're setting out to do? So core, we've got a legal obligation.
Yeah.
So that's going to be legal obligation under Article 6 and legal obligation under Article 9. And then if you want to do something internally with the data, you can't just pick it up from your core data and use it for another purpose. You have to be clear about that purpose from the start. And then that other purpose, if it is, we want to do kind of that overall, that general stats monitoring and improving and maintaining equality of opportunity and treatment, then that would be substantial public interest, and then that from the DPA. The only other thing in housing will be, and again, this is a completely different track. We have to, again, set out what is our destination here, what track are we going down. There is an argument for, and Stewart said it beautifully, how does it inform our service delivery? If we have to know certain information to allow our customers to actually access the service that they're supposed to be receiving in a reasonable, equitable way. So some of that will be health or disability information, and some of that will be language spoken. So not really ethnicity. It's going to be language, if that, because you could be of a different ethnicity and obviously speak English really, really well. So those kind of things you might need to know on an individual basis, so that you can make sure that person gets, the service they need. Like Stuart said, you can get a Ukrainian speaker if you need one, or if somebody needs aids and adaptations, obviously to a property, then you need to know they need aids and adaptations.
Reasonable adjustments,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so that would come under then your legal obligation under the law for Article 9 as well, for social protection law.
Social protection, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I would say there. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, I do struggle with exactly everything that everyone else is talking about, that people are just collecting EDI data because it's what we've been told to do, but actually not really thinking about what we're going to do with it. Whether we actually have a purpose. So,
and that is problematic. If you haven't got the plan from the start, then you actually don't have a lawful basis. If you are just going, oh, we'll find a reason to, we'll find something to do with it, or we'll make a graph and that'll be the output. Well, that's not a good output, is it? Hopefully, Stuart, that wouldn't be something that you would be, oh, well, there's a graph, great. There's got to be shaking. Yeah, good. No. There's got to be more. But the really key point is, and this is more operational, but it's that we've got to decide what the purpose is, and there's a track to each of those purposes. and there's a you know, a whole load of steps that need to be taken in order to be actually meeting that purpose and reaching that destination lawfully. We've got another hand. Oh, sorry, go on, Chris.
Oh, sorry, I was
that
going
you,
to say, I was just going to say from Stuart's perspective, if the DPO came to you as a board and said, look, we've just discovered we have unlawful processing for some of this internal data, you know, core is fine. That's the type of message that you want to hear, as simple and clear as that. And the action is we'll go away, and over the next month we will find a way to solve the lawful basis, whether that's, you know, better communication to the customer through the privacy notice or through whatever. That's the type of simple communication that you want. There is a problem, it's been identified, that there is an action plan towards resolution, and then you'd want to understand next month whether that has been resolved or not, and what other actions then may be required. Is that right?
Yeah, and we do get that.
Yeah.
You know, so for example, you know, I can recall one a couple of months ago where there'd been an accidental data breach of one record, and so we got the background to why it happened, how it happened, and then we've got the mitigating steps to ensure it doesn't happen again. So yeah, I mean, this is the sort of stuff that's the kind of meat and potatoes of governance when it comes to data.
Absolutely. Brilliant, thank you. Joe.
Sorry, couldn't get my mic on quick enough there. I think it's just sharing our journey, really, in terms with collecting data and how we report it to board. Because I sit on a board for another organisation, so I try to see it and do that dual strategy.
Really good. Yeah.
So some of the things we started to do is in 2022, we designed a customer strategy with customers, and also what we call our equality, diversity, inclusion, belonging strategy. And we designed that with customers on various focus groups. And as part of those strategies, it's identifying what data we're collecting with a clear purpose and what we're going to start doing with it. Within our corporate plan that was updated in April 24 this year, we made it very clear, again, designing with customers, why we were collecting the information, not just because it's a requirement, but it's the right thing to do, and it links in with previous strategies designed in 22. And what I've started to implement over the last 12 months is quarterly updates in our customer magazines about what we're starting to use customer data for and how it's influencing our services. And then from a board viewpoint, is on front sheet of any board reports, we have a specific section that includes our equality impact assessments, but also how customer influence and customer consideration has shaped the requirement of X board report. So I think, Stuart, in terms from what you're saying, and from my viewpoint as a board member, you don't want to be bogged down with the information. Sometimes you need that succinct statement that if you wish to do so, the wider information was there. So I'm just sharing what we're doing, really.
That's really useful. Thanks, Joe. That sounds really positive. And it comes back to that, linking it to why, the purpose, and then being transparent with customers as well, which I absolutely love to hear. Lots of nodding from Stewart as well. So that's great. Thanks, Joe. That's really good to hear. We have a question in the chat. That's the word. Does the EDI data have to be sorted against or linked to each individual tenant? This is the $1 million question. And this is where we get into lots and lots of issues. Oh, you've got your hand up as well. Did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just thought you were leading lovely to it. I just thought I'd highlight it. It's the bit that fascinates me.
And it is causing lots of problems, definitely. The difference between monitoring data, so just stats, kind of, generic don't know who the individuals are. And knowing who an individual is so that you can make sure that individual gets the service they need, because they need an interpreter or they need an aids and adaptations or something like that.
And it just massively changes.
Yeah. Yeah, it shouldn't be is the bottom line. If it's for that overarching monitoring, as far as possible, it should be anonymized, or at the very least pseudonymized, in that you could track back to someone, but the way that you're using the data, you've not got the their name actually attached. But due to the way that I think the data's collected and the data's stored a lot, it is being put next to the individual, and that could be problematic if that data falls into the wrong hands. It also might make people feel a little bit more uncomfortable sharing it if they know they're not sharing it anonymously. And it's the same for employment. When you're applying for a job, that should be anonymous as well. Somebody was telling me about somebody that's a governor at a school was interviewing the other day, and he realised that on the back of the guy's application form, it had the EDI data form, which said on it, "This is anonymous," but it was attached. And they were sitting there interviewing him, knowing his sexuality and his religion, and no need to know any of that.
I think this is such a critical thing, because if you're looking at risk profile, you're basically, the organisation is saying, by accidental design, we are collecting 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fields of sensitive data on every tenant. That's the ambition. Well, that's not proportionate to what you're trying to achieve, but it's because the system's built like that and the form's kind of designed like that.
Yeah.
And we can't pseudonymize, and we haven't thought of that. We're massively up in the volume of data per tenant for no real justifiable reason. And as a board member, I think that's a sort of accidental risk that's been pushed into this by poor design of a system, poor data collection. It can be done. It could be done. There's technology there. It's not rocket science to have pseudonymization of data sets, clarity on how it works at the back end. But your example there, Claire, is perfect. It's on the back of the same form.
I mean, that was paper, because that was local authority, and but now Stuart's a technology guy, so the question of the technology that's used for CRMs in housing is a whole other rabbit hole we could go down, isn't it, Stuart?
Don't go there.
And we will another day. But just before I forget what I was going to say, core. Yeah, so it used to happen with the core as well. So now it's all done electronically, but I'm casting my mind back to, and aging myself, the core returns used to be done on, like duplicate or triplicate paper, and it was handwritten on. And then one copy was sent off in a big envelope to the government department, and one copy was put in a pile for statistical analysis internally, I think. And then another copy used to get stuck on the tenancy file, which was an actual file in a filing cabinet. And although the way we're doing it has changed, I don't think the idea behind it has changed all that much everywhere, unfortunately. We've got a couple of comments in the chat, and we've had another hand, but has it gone again? Was there a hand? I've just raised my hand. That's not what I meant to do. I was looking at the people. Was there another hand raised? No?
Oh, that was me, Claire.
Oh, hello.
Yeah, hi, yeah. I was just wanting to add to that around like the anonymisation of the data and things. I completely agree that that's an approach that we should be taking. I think one of the problems we have, and I'm sure others probably have the same, is the capability of systems to allow us to sort of separate data out. And I think some housing associations, might be able to use published data where, their geographical area fits nicely with the published stats, but, quite often that isn't the case, and we need to be able to see that data changing over time. So we really need to kind of look at solutions that enable us to kind of separate the data that comes in for new customers and kind of keep that separately or anonymised. And at the moment, that's not something we've managed to kind of nail just yet, but be interested if others have got any kind of tips or how they've done it and you know, that we could look at as well.
Well, if we had a few hours, we could let Stewart talk about CRM for housing, but we won't go there. It's an issue across the sector. I think we'd all agree that the way we collect the information, the way we store it, is not ideal. We'll leave it at that. It's not ideal, and yeah, it's probably a conversation we could definitely carry on. Of, you know, where do we go from there? And, you know, where should we be aiming? Would be really good. This would be a perfect opportunity to say that that's something that Stewart and I and Dave Loudon and someone else are going to be discussing. When are we doing that, Stu?
Is that the 23rd? Is that the
23rd of September? Yeah, we're going to be talking about sort of acquisitions of CRM systems in housing. So that's on Dave Loudon's LinkedIn, if you want to have a look at that. That's an issue, for a thorny issue for another hour or more. So I'm going to pick up from the chat. We've got, okay, so some people would say use explicit consent if you're using information to prioritise services. At the end of the day, you can't force people to provide the information. It has to be voluntary. Absolutely. Why I don't say consent is because in this field, we're talking about landlord and tenant, and it's rarely likely to be fully, freely given consent because of that balance or imbalance of, you know, authority and power between a landlord and a tenant, even if it's only perceived. So consent is kind of the last resort always for me in the way that I approach lawful bases. And if it is something that somebody absolutely needs, like an aid and adaptation, you need to know a little bit about that. I'm not saying you need to know their full medical history, but you do need to know a little bit about that. So that it's all about appropriate, isn't it? You know, to the purpose, which is difficult.
If you're not looking for consent there, Claire, what would you be saying?
So again, it would depend what you're aiming at, what purpose you're aiming at. So if the purpose is to enable a customer to access the service in an equitable way, then that would, for me, come under your lawful basis of your legal obligation as a housing provider, which would come under, for me, social protection law. That's your Article 9 for that. We've got, for my organisations, we give customers the option of refusing to provide the information. And it's recorded as a refusal and empowering customers to exercise that right to refuse. I like the word empowering. I don't know if the word refusal maybe makes me feel a bit uncomfortable, that people might think they're going to be seen as being difficult. I love the word empowering, definitely. And this is just my initial reaction to that. But absolutely, especially when it's EDI monitoring, when we're talking about just those stats. It has to be voluntary.
Declined?
Politely decline, or I'd rather not say, you know, maybe is, yeah, just what I'm thinking of with that. But empowering customers is absolutely what we want to be doing, lawfully and as good customer service, you know. Oh, interesting. I've been told EDI data is pretty useless unless it can be linked to individuals, even if it's not about reasonable adjustments and is for overall monitoring. You're having to change a lot of your forms at the moment. Oh, interesting.
Sorry, Claire, the forms comment in response to your example of the local authority and all the request for
the thing on the back. Yeah.
Intermingle with, which I've noticed quite a lot. It's not separated out. So the tenant or the potential tenant is sort of left in the kind of uneasy space of like not knowing why this information and whether it would like affect the outcome of the form. So it wasn't clear at all. So so
you're improving the forms, definitely.
Absolutely, improving, but yes, my first comment though, I mean, it was talked about earlier, but I think in terms of our systems, I think it's very difficult, and it's about monitoring, our potential, are we being discriminatory, and if we are, let's make improvements. And I've been told that, if to do that, we can't, if we anonymize the EDI data, it's not going to be valuable data.
Interesting.
I can understand, but obviously there are data protection implications.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, interesting. Definitely a conversation I'd love to continue with you actually afterwards. We are running out of time, so I'm going to bring Stu in on that because he's just put his hand up.
I just wanted to comment on that about that it's useless unless it's linked to an individual. A classic one is we're developing in TAF a new small development about eight or nine flats. We're able, because it's surrounded by other TAF properties, we're able to get an idea of the community, specific characteristics of that community. And the reason that's important for us as an organisation is what we don't want to do is allocate those properties to other community members where they're isolated from their support structures. Why would we put people into a situation where we're not going to allow them to have a sustainable tenancy? So we don't need to know the individuals around that development. We just need to have a rough idea of the makeup of the community structure. And would through our allocation policies, would we actually be setting up residents and tenants for failure? We don't need to know the individual, but having that kind of demographic data does help the organisation.
That in my organisation, that's very much what the purpose is. But I do worry that sometimes you really can, with not a great deal of difficulty, you could trace back to the individual. But maybe I'm just being a little bit too, you have to balance, because I totally get what you're saying. It's very, very valid.
Oh, yeah, that, I guess my challenge would be, what my question would be really, would be, when we say we want people to be close to their support system, are we making assumptions of what their support system is and what it looks like? And that's probably not a question that you can answer in the next 7 minutes. So
no, but I think
it's something to consider, definitely.
It has to be, when you're dealing, like I said, with the amount of diverse communities that we operate within in Cardiff, we have to be mindful of that, because there is no point allocating people to properties where it's not going to be sustainable for them, because we're just setting them up to fail. So we've got to be mindful. So that's why I was just trying to make that point of anonymized EDI data can be useful. It doesn't always need to be linked to an individual.
Absolutely.
To make use of it. I think that's the point I was trying to get at.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you. We've got a question specifically for Stewart, and then I'll come back to Gary. In the chat, we've got, from Stewart's perspective, this is a big question. How regularly does the board review and act upon reports related to EDI data and data protection? And what criteria are used to evaluate the effectiveness of your data protection strategies at the highest level? That's a big question.
Right, the first one, obviously, because I mentioned right at the beginning, data and EDI falls under a lot of other different risk areas and areas of the business. A lot of the time, those are probably reported upon at and looked at in subcommittees, because that's why the subcommittee structure exists. As a board, we would probably get it every half a year. So we'd get probably a report around data. It might not be specifically around EDI data, but it would be around data, and data protection would sit within cyber and IT in general. So we'd get something probably half year, and then we'd get something at the year point. But the subcommittees are there, like the audit and risk, like the development subcommittee, like the people and culture committee. You know, those are empowered to look at the specific areas, and data, EDI, data protection, data security come under those remits as well. So that's where it's regularly looked upon.
Yeah.
The criteria, now that's really that's interesting.
Yeah.
Because that's like, how long is a piece of string, really? You know, for example, if I look at the example I said earlier on about, you know, using EDI data to ensure we're building cohesive communities. If, you know, one measure of success around capturing the EDI data and then using that to inform service delivery could be that we've not, you know, we allocated all of that new development, and we've had sustainable tenancies for the past 3 years.
Yeah, you can see.
You know.
Yeah.
A lot of that, sometimes we have to trust the professionals that we hire within the business to come to us and show us, we've kept, you know, this is what this data's for, this is why we're using it, this is how it goes back to that earlier point I made about, if you can simply describe why we're doing it, how it informs service or strategy, then that's okay. So that's a bit of a woolly answer, but I think to give you a detailed response, I'd probably have to really go back and look at policies and procedures, and I'd probably have to, you know, the answer itself could probably take about an hour.
Probably, yeah. That's a very, I think you did a brilliant job answering that. Thank you so much. Just gonna check. Tony was just asking, should EDI data be restricted to the people who need access to it, which would reduce the risk? And I'm saying yes, but the challenge again is in the way that the data is stored in the systems. Data protection on housing boards always concentrates on data breaches, and but there's a risk of breaking the law much earlier than that. Completely agree, Olivia. Yeah, I think we need to.
I'm lucky that we don't just look at data. I mean, data breaches is one thing, but data in itself is, it's, you know, you look at everything we're doing, data forms a part of everything we're talking about. So I feel a lot happier that it's not just, we're not just looking at exceptions, we're looking at how data is actually utilized within the organization.
You're looking at the inputs as well as the outputs and the exceptions.
Yeah, but from a board perspective, input, that's where we're not getting the detail. It's the outputs and how it actually informs operational matters and strategy, overarching strategy.
Yeah. Brilliant. No, seems to, yes, you've added that, which I would agree in a lot of places, I'm sure. That is, but
we'll make a sweeping statement.
But no, I think in a lot of places that is absolutely, that it's the data breaches that end up on the agenda and not everything else sometimes, or not other things sometimes.
What Olivia's saying there, though, is one of my own bugbears. And one of my passions, which is there is a strategic deficit within SLTs and boards on housing, particularly I notice it on housing associations, around really understanding data and technology. You know, rather than seeing it as it's like, you know, it's functional, it does this. We have to see it much more in the wider strategic context of how we deliver housing services. So actually, that as Olivia has put it there, you're probably right. It probably is the default position on many boards, which is a shame, because it shouldn't be that.
Absolutely, yeah, and I completely support the mission that you are on, to have more data literate and more technology literate board members and across the sector. Absolutely. I'm going to just
one specific question for Stewart. Sorry, quickly.
Oh, go on. We've got 1 minute. Quick.
Yeah, for a board who is not digitally literate and needs to raise their game, how much time do you think they should put aside to do that, to become more digitally literate?
They need to. I mean, I think it's imperative. I think the imperative is there because it's essential to a successful organisation, whether you're a housing association or a commercial business. You've got to understand digital in its widest context, you know, how we use data, how data informs operational delivery, but also strategic direction, how technology can transform the organization. You know, it's so for me, if and I talk about this a lot, and I do a lot of talking about this. If the organization does not prioritize digital in its entirety and actually have someone, not the finance director, but someone on the board, the SLT, looking at this and how it informs, that they're missing a massive trick, you know.
Thank you. That was the answer I was hoping you were going to give.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for all your input. Stewart, especially, thank you so much for being here. That was so useful, interesting, brilliant to get the board's eye view of EDI and data generally. We don't have a Hive Online next month because we have the Hive Live. If you have not got your tickets yet for the Hive Live, it is on 2nd of October in the Midlands. Please do have a look. You'll see it all over my LinkedIn and on the website, cpdataprotection.com. Chris is one of our speakers this year, and we're going to have a fantastic time again. Last year went really well. Hopefully this year will as well. You don't have to come. You don't have to be in housing to come to the Hive Live. It's not just housing, Georgina, so you can still come. You'll be very, very, very welcome. I'll speak to you all soon. I will let you know when the recording is available. And thank you again, everyone. Brilliant to see you all. Thank you.